Hi, everyone. This is Bobby Warren of AfterJournalism.com and the After Journalism YouTube channel. And I'm excited about today's guest. He's not the Fighting Irish, but he's Cliff Feitner of Rittman. And let me bring him on and let me tell you why I'm excited. Good morning, Cliff. How you doing, brother?
Bobby, I am doing great this morning, or better than I deserve, as Dave Ramsey would say.
Hey, so before we get started, tell tell the people how we met each other.
Well, it was one very cold December morning back in, I believe it was either 2015 or 2016. Rittman Fire Chief Don Swigert picked me up, and he had like 6 dozen donuts in the back of his SUV, and we went to Akron to be on the Jeff Kinsbach morning show as part of the Rittman Mafia, as one of the members of the studio audience that day called us. It was me, Don Swigert, and Jim Herchek, otherwise known as Steeler Jim.
Yeah. Oh, he's a Steeler fan. Hey, we're recording on a Tuesday, so it's Patriots Monday on a Tuesday. They just beat the Buffalo Bills 14-10 and silenced the Bills Mafia, not the Rittman Mafia. But anyway, plus Steeler Jim's Steelers beat the Ravens, so the Patriots are number one in the AFC East. But I digress. So anyway,
well, at least the Browns didn't lose.
No, they didn't. They were they didn't record any losses or ties
or wins. It was a bye week.
Yeah. So anyway, like Don invited me up to join you guys at the radio station. At the time, I was a reporter at the Daily Record in beautiful downtown Worcester, Ohio, and that's when we got a chance to meet. And so from that time on, we kind of like this is kind of odd. Like I wouldn't like if we don't talk every day, like we're not close friends, but I feel that if I needed anything, I could get in touch with you and say, "Hey, Cliff, I need your help," you know? So it's kind of like, I don't know, there was just something there that, like, I just know that if I needed anything, I can get in touch with you.
Yeah, and you actually put a beanie on my head in a selfie that I took and put on Facebook once too. So
I wouldn't do anything
that
like
means
that.
a lot having that done from you, because it means it's one of your friends.
Hey, when we first met, you had a lot more hair. Did you get a haircut or what?
Nope, just tied back now.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Got the most famous ponytail in Rittman.
So yeah, there was that day in Akron. It was me, you, Don, Jim, Dustin was in the studio with Jeff, and
Ed Esposito, the newsman.
Yeah, I haven't had as much or any contact with him, but you know, Dustin, Jeff, Jim, you know, we became Facebook friends and stuff like that. But tell us, I'm going to ask you, like, before we even get into the reason why you're on, like, I wanted you to be on, I wanted to interview you because you did something that I think is amazing and I think can be an inspiration to people in journalism. Like, so the whole concept of after journalism is to help journalists find ways to thrive and earn a living beyond journalism or after journalism. But as I understand it, you've been using your voice for 22 years. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, I am the voice of the Rittman Indians marching band. I have been announcing the halftime shows at the Rittman football games and the shows that they go on Saturday nights, and uh, their appearances at the Wayne County Fair the last few years. And it started when my daughter was a junior in Rittman High School. The previous band announcer was the police chief at the time, Larry Boggs. His daughter was head majorette, and she was Miss Majorette Ohio, and so it was proud Papa up in the press box announcing the halftime shows. Well, I knew that she was graduating, and I had asked my daughter to ask Ed Sims, who was the band director at the time, and he just retired last year, if he would need an announcer. She said, well, my dad went to broadcasting school, and he's expressed a desire to announce for the band. Ed tells her, well, we'll try him out for 2 weeks, and if it doesn't work out, we'll get somebody else. So that's been our running joke for the past 22 years, that I am on a 2-week agreement. And it just occurred to me at the end of this past season, they're going to use me until my voice is too weak.
And okay, so you do announcing, right?
Yes.
And I think shortly after we met, you published a book.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that.
Well, the book is called Caricatures of My Mind. You can get it on Amazon. It makes for a great Christmas gift.
Can I see that cover again? Who's that good-looking dude on the cover?
Oh, that's me in shorter hair times. And getting to that cover, the cover art was done by at the time, a Rittman High School student. His name's Peter Chickwack. And he had come on Facebook, and he said that he was looking to make some money to help his family out, and that he would pay $10 for a black and white drawing, $15. He would charge $10 for a black and white drawing, $15 for a color drawing. So I got in touch with him because I was talking to my publisher, and he says, well, what we need is a caricature of you on the book, and then, thinking about TV, trolls, and coffee. So I asked Peter if he could do that for me. He said, sure. And within 12 hours, he sent me a picture of what he did, and I gave him $20, which my publisher told me it was the deal of the century. But Peter is a very talented young man. He graduated in 2018, and his sister's coming up through school, and he told me that she's more talented than he is in art. So I was using local talent in that as well, because I am proud of my town.
So after he got paid, he let you know that there was somebody more talented, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is several years afterwards, and then his mom came up to me during a football game. After, because she found out that he was listed on my book, and if you go to Amazon, you'll see by Cliff Feitner and Peter Chickwack, and so she bought a few copies to give to relatives, and she told me that she didn't even know that he had done this until he had come home with a bag of groceries for the family.
Wow, that's awesome. So now the reason why I wanted to have you on today, like, can you tell the story about us running into each other at Goodwill at the Goodwill store in Worcester?
Okay, well, I was on my way home. I took my son over to Massillon to get a cooler over at Menards, and he lives in Worcester, just south of downtown. And so I decided to make a couple of detours on the way home, because usually the way that I go home from Worcester would be 585. But I ended up over on Milltown Road inside of Worcester, and there was Bobby talking to somebody else, and I'm trying to back my SUV into a space, and he's watching me thinking I'm going to hit somebody. I told him I'd try harder next time. And then we got to talking, and you had suggested to me, as I was telling you about my 360-degree customer service podcast, and you had suggested to me that I check out the website of this man named Pat Flynn. Well, I get I listen to Pat Flynn's, at least one of his podcasts every week, and so I knew about him. So I went to his website and I signed up for the free podcasting course, and then that led me to Buzzsprout, which had me kicking around wanting to do a podcast. I didn't know, the podcast that I wanted to do, and then it occurred to me that I wanted to do something in town in Rittman, and you were the inspiration of that because, one, you were the Rittman City reporter for the Daily Record, and you told me that afternoon how you got to be the Rittman City reporter. And then once we met going to Akron that day, I ran into you several more times at town meetings. You were telling me that people like me weren't allowed into the graduation that year, teasing me. But I saw that, you were anywhere that anything was being done inside the city of Rittman. You could have had your email forwarded to the 44270 at the time, and people were proud of the job that you did for the Daily Record.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. Yeah, because so when I first started the newspaper, I was assigned Rittman, right? And so it was like there was no choice. You're covering Rittman. I'm like, okay. And when I first started, Rittman was the largest city on my beat. I covered a lot of villages. Then I became city editor for a while. And during the Great Recession, we had some layoffs. And so the news editor said, "Hey, Bobby, I need you to come back to reporting. What do you want to do?" And I love county government, and I really come to love the city of Rittman. So I said, I want to cover the county and I want to cover Rittman. And so I got to do that. So it's good to hear. Back when after I started covering the county, Rittman was no longer the biggest thing on my beat. It became like kind of the smallest thing because it was like county and Rittman. But I really enjoyed the people up there. I mean, they're no nonsense. They'll tell you they'll tell you exactly what they're thinking, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, you at times I saw that you did definitely have your finger on the pulse, especially since one of the people I always saw you talking to was Helen Becerra.
Oh, yeah, she was wonderful.
Yeah, I
This-
really missed her, and I believe that she was the last editor of the Main Street Press before they went out of publication in 1984 or 85.
yeah, might have been. And then when I met her, she was working for and I want to say a competitor, but I don't want to say a competitor. I'd never recognize the competitors. I would just say, I'd always think we didn't have any competition, but that's really not a good way to look at things. But she was writing for another newspaper, a weekly, and she would give me news tips, stuff that her publication really wouldn't get into, and so we had a lot of good conversations. But yeah, she was a wonderful lady.
She knew everybody in town, and she always had a good word for everybody in town. I became friends with her later in life, and I wish, starting this podcast, especially since
Oh,
I do handle a little bit of Rittman's history, I wish I would have her knowledge, or at least her to be able to talk to. She would probably be on speed dial right now. And kids, speed dial is what you did before you said, Google, call Helen Becerra.
yeah, exactly. So you've been hinting at this other podcast. You really haven't talked about it, but this is why I wanted to get you on. So we kind of met at Goodwill. You told me about your podcast. I said, hey, check out Pat Flynn because he's done a lot of material about affiliate marketing and about starting a podcast. And I can't remember, was it in the parking lot where we kicked this idea around, or did we get in touch later?
I think we had gotten in touch later because you were telling me how to you know about Pat Flynn and his website, and how to check out those things, because I did have another podcast that I kind of sort of was working on, and then I'd had minor surgery on my hand this past August, and I think when they took out pieces of bone, they also took out some of my motivation for about a month. And so I've done one episode of that one since then, and I just needed something that I had a little bit of a passion for, which I do have a passion for customer service, but I also have a passion for the town that I've called home for the past 38 years.
And so tell us about this podcast.
Okay, it is called Around Rittman, and I have it set up right now to come out every Thursday. That is because the Rittman Press newspaper that existed in some form from September of 1912 to, like I said, about 1984 to 1985, traditionally for years come out on Thursdays. So I'm trying to keep that going right there. And I'm also kicking around other things. I acquired the rights to or the web domain rittmanpress.com, in case I'd want to use that as a hub for my podcast and maybe other people wanting to do things. As when I mentioned the Rittman Press, everybody talked about hits and bits and other things that were going on in the paper, but that sent me into studying a lot about the history of the town, including going to the Rittman Press archives that are available over at the Wayne County Public Library website. And then once the idea started rolling, I started talking to people such as Police Chief Robert Shows, asking him how to get a hold of the police reports that I did not see in any of the newspapers that are out nowadays. And he gave me permission that I could go and get those anytime I wanted. I talked to Rittman Athletic Director Joe Staley, who told me where to go to get scores for the sports teams from the school. So you don't get those in the papers nowadays. And if you get the Dead Trees edition of the Daily Record now, they're about 2-3 days behind in the news. So
right, there's so they're trying to go. There's an emphasis on digital first. So so we're recording on a Tuesday, right?
yes.
So if you were to submit something, into the newspaper today, the earliest it would get into the newspaper would be Thursday. And as long as it's like before noon or something like that, that's the earliest, but it's probably going to be at least 3 days out. And, it's just a shame, but that's what they want to do. So they're not sticking around for late scores. You have to get that stuff, on the website. But when you told me that you started the podcast, I was just ecstatic because we had in one of our meetings, when I was at the newspaper, we had this meeting about this 10-mile radius that like I don't know, like some high number, maybe around 90%, 85, 90% of a newspaper's subscriptions are going to be within a 10-mile radius of the city that they're in, right? And so Rittman is outside that 10-mile radius.
Right.
And so, but, so when you're sitting there looking at numbers, you're trying to find ways to cut cost. You're trying to reduce expenses. You're trying to pay off a multi-million-dollar acquisition, which, Gatehouse Media had to do at the time. They now bought out Gannett and kept the Gannett name. but you know, so things started suffering. So that the that 10-mile radius was always like fast and loose. If you needed a story, oh, there was one outside that 10-mile radius, then all of a sudden that boundary didn't exist. But like none of the reporters really liked that because, we built relationships all over the county. We covered, all corners of the county. And, so it wasn't like a hard thing, but, we started to focus differently. And so, you know, after I left the newspaper, they started cutting reporters, a couple more reporters left. So people started leaving and they really weren't replacing everybody. And so there were fewer bodies and there was just this opportunity there for someone to come in and provide what is lacking, you know, uh, and I was so glad to hear that you did it. And because like I said, my my motivation for afterjournalism.com and the YouTube channel is twofold. One, I want to help other journalists succeed after journalism, and two, I want to make additional money, for my family,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
And so I'm trying to set, that Pat Flynn talks about building a passive income and things like that. And so to hear that you not only started a podcast, right? So one, it should serve as an inspiration to these journalists like what can I do? Well, you could always leave and go compete against your old boss, start a podcast, right? And two, if I understood you correctly, you're in discussions with potentially the first sponsor of the Around Rittman podcast.
Yes, sir.
And that, like, I'm not going to get into dollars because, a lot of times people want to see metrics. They want, how many listeners do you have? You have to start somewhere, right? And it's exciting because, like, so you went to broadcasting school, but you haven't been in broadcasting in a traditional sense uh, for many years, and here you are going out, starting a podcast. Now you always had the voice, right?
Yes.
That training has served you well, but now you're applying it in a different way. And I think journalists can do the same thing. They can start a YouTube channel. They can start a podcast. And one, you're breaking news today because now you let me know you got rittmanpress.com. So at some point, we need to talk about getting your website up so you can host your or embed your podcast there. That is that is awesome.
Yeah, my mind runs a mile a minute when I start thinking about that stuff. When people feed things into me, like I was thinking last night, that could be a hub for maybe other people in town wanting to do things as well, and a
Yeah,
one-stop shop for people to get news uh, outside of social media. Because social
that
media, you've got to filter out some of the good and some of the bad. Like I told my wife when I was getting ready to start the podcast, no, I'm not going to talk about people blowing up fireworks on South Hicken because one, I could care less. I can sleep through just about anything. Uh, I want to promote Rittman, and it's part of my lifelong passion to communicate. Which,
yeah.
if you go back to when I was in the third grade, we were making cities and rural areas as an art project, and people were making their little buildings. I made a radio station, you know,
Yeah. Oh
and,
wow.
and they put the radio station on the farm and not in the city, which uh,
Uh,
traditionally you did need a lot of land for a decent transmitter site. So I guess somebody knew what they were doing at that point. And when I got out of high school, I was listening to Wixie 1260, which is one of the iconic radio stations back in the day. It was a very weak signal, and I lived in Medina County, and as soon as the sun set, you couldn't hear their signal, or it was very staticky. So I heard about the Wixie School of Broadcast Technique, and I called the number 391 1111, and I talked to somebody who sent me some material. I filled it out, sent it in, and next thing I know, I was signed up for the summer course, which took place after I graduated from high school. It was a 3-month course, and learned how to use the voice and all that stuff. But I also listened to other people telling me I wasn't going to make it in radio. I didn't have the chops, or this, that, or the other. So I just put that in the back of my mind and didn't really want to leave home, which I would have had to move to Kentucky, Indiana, some small town at their radio station back when you had private owners who owned the radio stations before the big boys gobbled them up, which your former employer still owns the radio station in Worcester. And I was glad they stuck to their guns back when all the big companies were buying the other companies up, because they wanted to buy the FM station and move the tower, because of the strength of the tower, and license it for Barberton. So a little bit of history right there. But back in 2006, I decided to test the waters and blog. So I have a blog. I didn't tell you about this pre-show. It's called Wixie's Gone Bananas. And because on the chat boards, I was known as 74 Wixie grad, which is still part of my identity. It's part of one of my email addresses that I use. But I would be writing up things, and I use the Rittman band as subject matter quite a bit. I use things that happening in Rittman. My last podcast, I referred to one of the posts that I wrote back in 2007 called Once Again Hometown Proud. It was back when the Foudy family opened up the IGA after it was closed for about 8 months. Human interest part of that story for me was my grandson, who was 4 years old at the time, was the first customer. So I was blogging, and I wanted to make a podcast back then. Didn't know how to do things, didn't know what equipment I was going to need. So I put that back on the back burner. I lost my job making maintenance parts for the railroad back on January 31st, 2009. I was out of work for a while and got a job over at a major telemarketing company. So I've been using my voice for my work for the past 11 years as well.
That's awesome. And so again, you could, people watching, they can check out the scroll, but your podcasts are available just about everywhere. And I would venture a guess that your podcast is probably available on sites that you've never heard of. Because my wife did a podcast for one season, Journey from Debt. And it's like, I did a search for her podcast, and it came up on sites that we never sent it to, because I use a service, podcast.co, and it will submit the podcast to like all the major podcast companies like iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast. But then it started showing up on other sites as well. But like, I'm excited, and to listen to what you want to do with the website. That's another area that is definitely, underserved in Rittman, because, and the journalists out there who are, looking for inspiration. So you have a domain, right? I can get that. We can get a website up relatively simply. You're going to have to learn how to how to maintain it and how to post on it. But we can get a website up quickly. We can do like almost like it'll be easy to do like a magazine front type deal. Um, but you talked about possibly bringing in other contributors to that website, which is an incredible idea because, like, I remember Jay Rosen, who's a journalism professor at Columbia University. He and I disagree on a lot of things, right? And but one of the things where we agree, one of the things I appreciate is like he talks about how the internet has brought about a democratization of news, right? You know, journalists kind of have this pro-am mentality that, hey, we're the pros. Cliff, you sit down, you stay in your lane, and you leave the news coverage to us. But Jay Rosen is like, you know what? With the internet, the Cliff Feitners of the world can be competing with the Gannett's of the world. Think about like major stories that were broken by bloggers, right? Who uh, who were like just doing this like part time, or like Dan Rather's career came tumbling down because of a blogger, right? He's like, no, that letter you have, that font is not available. That's a computer font that came along much later. So it's just it's just amazing that what you can do, and along these same lines, right? I I was very late to the game getting a smartphone, right? Like I would go in like Verizon and say, "What kind of phone you want?" I'm like, "The free one. What do you think?" I want. I, I don't even know if they give out free phones anymore, but there was a period of time where they offered like a free phone, right?
Yeah, I remember.
But once, but as the internet became more established and you had smartphones and you had sites like YouTube, kind of I think before YouTube, I mean before Google owned it, but with that smartphone, I had like a $300 smartphone. I forget what it was. I think it was a Thunderbolt or something. I forget who made it, right? But with that smartphone, I was able to compete against Cleveland news stations who had live satellite trucks. You know, I one of the issues for some reason I remember almost getting into like this verbal thing with some guy on the bridge heading into Rittman. There was something going on, and he didn't want me there. I don't. Oh, maybe with all the dead fish one time. He said he's going to call the police. I'm like, go ahead and call the police. Do you want the? I'll give you the number. Call them on me, right? But I was able to shoot video from the scene, put it on YouTube from the location, and like within 10-15 minutes, I'm able to get news up. Whereas back in the day, it would take hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment in a live satellite truck, and I can do it from my phone. And I think what you're doing with the podcast and what you're going to do with the website is just absolutely incredible.
Well, you see, Rittman needs some media coverage right now. Of
Yeah.
course, we get it. We get it in major stories, such as a couple of years back on Memorial Day. A couple of young boys decided to go swimming in Chippewa Creek. One got pulled under, and
Um,
they ended up finding him dead.
yeah.
But we had all the news services in our town that day. It was probably a quarter mile from my house where everything had happened, and it was a very hot day. And the town had really stepped forward to make sure that the rescuers had cold water and had other refreshments. And you saw all sorts of news trucks in that town. uh, that day.
Yeah.
So things like that, you're going to get the coverage, and like you had alluded to in a previous video that you've done, when the young man wrote a poem out of frustration. Believe me, this is a little bit more than 8 years ago now. You're talking about how time flies,
Right.
and he ended up, causing, some strife within the football team, and some within the community. That got worldwide coverage, as you had said previously. Two weeks
Yeah.
later, 2 weeks later, the final game of the season, Rittman had a young man on the team who was severely autistic, and
That
the
Big
Rittman,
Mike.
yeah, Big Mike, the Rittman team and the Waynedale team decided to run this play where they allowed him to score a touchdown, and I mean it's like it caused a lot of sweaty eyes inside the stadium that night,
Yeah.
and I just wish the band would have known what was happening, because it was an extended timeout, and the band,
Yeah.
they thought, well, the game's over, they're getting ready to leave. It would have been great,
Yeah.
to have him score, have the band start playing rah rah for Rittman, and
Yeah.
that would have just added to everything. But that got very little news coverage outside of the area, and that was the big story. That they should have just shown that all over. Let them know,
Yeah.
what sportsmanship really is.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Cliff, that might be a good segue into wrapping up this conversation. I appreciate your time. I know you have things to do. You got to get to work, and so I appreciate you being generous with your time. And for people out there, I just found out about his sponsorship yesterday, and I'm like, okay, Cliff, I need to interview you. And you're like, when? I'm like, let's do it tomorrow morning. I couldn't do it last night because the Patriots were on.
Of course, and I had to run out and pick up a couple of prescriptions and some groceries, and my car died on the way home. So
Oh man. But anyway, hey Cliff, thank you. It's just so everyone knows you're around Rittman Podcast. It's on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Pocket Cast, probably others. And your book, Characters of My Mind, is available on Amazon. What does that thing look like again? All right. Hey, accept no, what is it? Accept no duplicates, or I don't know.
substitutes,
What's that? Accept
except
no.
no substitutes. And if you go
There you
to
go.
Amazon and you type in my name, Cliff Feitner, Cliff, F like Foxtrot, EIGH, T like Tango, and like November, ER, you will see that there are several ebooks of my poetry, which are available on Kindle.
All right. So what you're saying is type in Cliff Feitner in Amazon, or is that what you're saying?
That is correct. I mean, there's another Cliff Feitner who used to live in Cuyahoga Falls. He was a supervisor for Goodyear. And we are distant relatives, and we happened to meet by chance one day. And he's retired, lives in Florida, and he also wrote a book back when Goodyear had transferred him to Germany. So there is
All
two
right.
Cliff Feitners who are authors.
All right. Well, Cliff, thank you so much for being part of this, my after journalism efforts. And those of you out there who want to, if you're looking for a way to kind of make some money outside of journalism, you're looking to start a new career, check out afterjournalism.com, afterjournalism.com. Let's see how I did it and how others have been able to do it, and how Cliff is starting to do it with his Around Rittman podcast. And
That
he's
might be before
potential,
journalism, then.
but after broadcastingschool.com. All right, Cliff, you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate this, and hopefully you'll download my Around Rittman podcast, and also visit Pop Shake Shop, 8 North Main Street, Rittman, Ohio. He is an up and comer, and funny thing is, he is the one who offered to sponsor me, and he is David Collins is a big part of the Rittman Historical Society, and he has a passion for Rittman history, which is part of my podcast. And also, and a
What's the
funny
name of the
thing,
place?
Pop's Shake Shack, 8 North Main Street, Rittman, Ohio. And
Shake Shack?
Pop's Shake Shack.
And when I hear Shake Shack, I think of the hamburgers.
Well, what I thought about when I first started passing there was he was a big fan of Archie books, because the soda shop in Archie's books was Pop's Chocolate Shop. So, but he said that he calls it Pops because his grandkids call him Pop. Another thing that I know, one link that we have is we both have the Big Chuck laugh as our ringtone on our phone.
The Big Chuck laugh.
Yeah, if you ever watched Big Chuck and Little John, you would hear this ha ha on there, and that I chose that as my ringtone because people around my age group, we used to watch that on Friday night before going to bed, if we went to bed.
All right. Hey, well, thanks for everything, and I hope to talk to you again soon, where you have like your website is up, you got people contributing, and the podcast is taking off. So, I wish you well, and something you might want to do is document how you're doing this stuff along the way. And, you could always, teach others how to do it. So, anyway, I wish you well, my friend. Take care.
Okay, we'll talk after the holiday since my day job is working customer service for a toy company.
All right, be good. And don't forget to visit afterjournalism.com.